Dee da da dee da da dee da 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 da. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Dennis Prager Show, where we talk about everything. We even talked to a writer on Mother Jones at Mother Jones about the Koch brothers. I found it fascinating. Welcome to the show. There is a very important piece in the Wall Street Journal today by Daniel Henninger, Winds of War Again. And I will read you excerpts because they're important. It's important. Americans are sick and tired of war. There is no free society that is not sick and tired of war. Name me one free society that isn't sick and tired of war. Right? The Europeans sick and tired of war. Well, they don't fight anything, but they're sick and they became sick and tired of war after World War I. And that was obviously doubled after World War II. Think the Israelis are not sick and tired of war? All of a sudden, out of nowhere, Dad gets called up, their son gets called up to go and fight people whose only purpose in life is to murder Israelis. We're not sick and tired of war. Is there any American who wouldn't prefer to be at home and enjoying life to the best of their ability with their family? So the fact that Americans are sick and tired of war doesn't mean anything in terms of what we should do. It's a very powerful emotion and one that is universal among free societies. In militaristic societies, people aren't sick and tired of war. And even there, obviously, a lot of civilians are sick and tired of war. But enough people, was Germany sick and tired of war? It's an interesting question. I don't think so. They got sick and tired of war when they started losing, but they weren't sick and tired of war when Hitler went into various countries and took them over. Then they were, when he took over Czechoslovakia, they were gung-ho. When he took over Austria and Austria joined in the Anschluss, as it was called, they were lining the streets, throwing kisses at Hitler. So I don't know, when Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, were Italians sick and tired of war? Probably not. So my point is, free societies are sick and tired of war all the time, and non-free societies, it's a mixed bag. So the fact that my fellow Americans are sick and tired of war after Afghanistan and Iraq is so therefore what? See, I'm interested in people's emotions because I'm a human, but I'm not interested in people's emotions in terms of making policy. You make policy with your mind, which should be, by the way, applicable to just about everything in life. Where the mind should be the determiner. So Daniel Henninger writes about this being the 100th anniversary of the start of World War I. World War I, as you know, I've been fixated on because World War I made everything horrible possible. No, not just possible. Made everything horrible in the 20th century inevitable. And you can't speak about inevitability, generally speaking, in history, because nothing is inevitable. But World War I did it. Without World War I, you would not have had communism and you wouldn't have had Nazism. Pretty good, huh? Pretty good. And I might add, the death of much of Christianity in Europe. So, just to mention 3 consequences of World War I. So here he's reflecting on this, and he's calling it Winds of War Again. Speaking of this 100th anniversary of World War I. First, a revealing stop in the years just before Munich. Munich is where the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, met with Hitler, came back and said, peace in our time, and the Brits were thrilled, and Munich has now become synonymous with appeasement of evil. What would you like, Herr Hitler? We'll work it out so that you won't want to make a war. But, of course, when you appease evil, you get more of it. It's as simple as that. Then, anyway, first a revealing stop in the years just before Munich, when in 1935, 38 was Munich. This is 1935. Benito Mussolini's Italy invaded Ethiopia. Before the invasion, Ethiopia's emperor, Haile Selassie, did what the civilized world expect one to do in the post-World War I world. He appealed for help to the League of Nations. This was the precursor to the United Nations. The League imposed on Italy limited sanctions, which were ineffectual. One might say this was one of history's earlier red lines. Mussolini blew it, invading Ethiopia and using mustard gas on its army, as Bashar Assad has done to Syria's rebel population. Mussolini merged Ethiopia with Italy's colonies in East Africa. The League condemned Italy and dropped its sanctions. In defeat, listen to this, especially in light of what the Wall Street Journal published today that I read in the first hour, but listen to this. In defeat, Haile Selassie, that was the emperor of Ethiopia, delivered a famous speech to the League of Nations in Geneva. He knew they wouldn't help. As he stepped from the podium, he remarked, "It is us today. Tomorrow it will be you." And, of course, that's exactly what happened. Tomorrow it was they. We would say it was them. I'm just being grammatically accurate. I read to you in the first hour, and I will come back to Henninger in a moment. I read to you in the first hour Eric Hoffer on Israel, 1968, 46 years ago. Eric Hoffer, the great American longshoreman who was a philosopher, wrote The True Believer, a classic. And he wrote at the time, "I have a premonition," with this he ended, and it's published in today's Wall Street Journal, again, 46 years later. "I have a premonition that will not leave me. As it goes with Israel, so will it go with all of us. Should Israel perish, the Holocaust will be upon us." Remember Haile Selassie's terms? Remember when he was invaded and the West did nothing with regard to Italy? It is us today. Tomorrow it will be you. And here is Eric Hoffer in 1946. "I have a premonition that will not leave me. As it goes with Israel, so will it go with all of us. Should Israel perish, the Holocaust will be upon us." Yes, who is Ukraine fighting? Russia. Who is Israel fighting? Is Israel fighting freedom-loving people? Is Israel fighting let's put it this way, isn't Israel fighting people who would like to destroy us? It makes it a little hard to broadcast when they're doing a fire drill in my building. I have flashing lights, I have intercom, and an alarm. There's got to be a way to bribe them into having the fire drills after my show. There's a lot of hours there that they could choose to do that.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Yes, exactly right. Apparently so. Only I. Exactly. Only when I'm broadcasting can they be prevented. Today, Israel is fighting the worst threat to the world since Nazism and communism. Violent Islam. Right? Yes or no? Is there anybody is there one person listening, one, who can deny that fact, that the greatest threat since Nazism and communism is violent Islamism? Tell me. I can't believe there's one. That's why, by the way, you may not know this. Most Arab countries are siding with Israel. Did you notice there's silence coming out of the Arab world, out of the Arab governments with regard to Hamas? We'll be back in a moment. 1-8-PRAGER 776. My friends, I'm Dennis Prager. The parallels between now and earlier in the 20th century are elucidated in Daniel Henninger's column in the Wall Street Journal today. It is us today, tomorrow it will be you, said the emperor of Ethiopia in 1935 after fascist Italy attacked them. How true that was. But the Europeans, just like many Americans today, have moved in a post-World War I, we in a post-Iraq, post-Afghanistan isolationism. They can all screw themselves so long as we don't get involved. That's fine with us. As if we live on another planet. As if the people that we fought in Iraq, the people we are fighting in Afghanistan, the people Israel are fighting right now, don't want to kill every one of you. Everywhere they go, they just kill. They're killing machines. They're like sharks. See the video up on YouTube? I didn't. I couldn't. My mother-in-law said she gathered the strength to watch it, and she spoke to me about it. I know about it. I just didn't want to see it. The ISIS put up a video of beheaded Iraqis. I think 40 of them. You see headless bodies, and I believe you see heads. They're proud of their sadism. It's a fascinating thing. They don't have any desire to hide it. They wish to. It's a different form of evil. I mean, you thought you've reached the nadir with Nazism and communism, and in some ways you did. But this is a real rival, and it's in its own way. The Nazis wanted to cover up their atrocities. Communists, same thing. But these people actually are happy about it. I mean, the others were happy. I mean, they're proud of it, I should say. So in light of that, it becomes particularly, I would say, I said this earlier, and it's very rare. I don't normally have this reaction. I don't understand. See, I understand all these things that people do that I don't agree with. But I don't understand John Kerry aligning himself with the most radical elements in the world, most radical anti-Israel elements, Turkey and Qatar, against Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and trying to impose a ceasefire when Israel is fighting our enemy. We should be cheering. You don't think Hamas is, John Kerry, you don't think Hamas is an American enemy? So he writes, Daniel Henninger, in today's Wall Street Journal, 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, not unlike John Kerry today, shuttled tirelessly between London and wherever Adolf Hitler consented to meet him to discuss a nonviolent solution to Hitler's intention to annex the Sudetenland, the part of Czechoslovakia inhabited by ethnic Germans. Hitler earlier in the year had annexed Austria, with nary a peep from the world community. He puts community in quotes correctly. Many said the forced absorption of Austria was perfectly understandable. One may hope Mr. Kerry and President Obama have more success with their Stop the Violence mission to Vladimir Putin, Kiev, Gaza, Iraq, Syria, Tehran, Afghanistan, and the South China Sea than Neville Chamberlain had with Hitler, who pocketed eastern Ukraine, the Sudetenland, and then swallowed the rest of Czechoslovakia, which ceased to exist. Yeah, that's right. Why aren't the parallels good? Why aren't the parallels accurate? Putin, you want eastern Ukraine? Just leave us alone. We're not involved. We don't want to get involved. The U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, though fought by a dedicated professional military, are said to have turned America in on itself, as two big wars did to Europe. The idea is that Americans are tired of their world role now, but tireless men like Hitler always find advantage in other nations' fatigue. Bravo, Daniel Henninger, whom I had on a number of times. This was a particularly fine column. We're tired, but you know what? The bad guys are tireless. Sorry, folks. It's time to grow up and know what a bad world it is. And it's going to get a lot worse. And here, the irony with the Kerry mission is America's not asked to do anything. We're not asked to send one even advisor. Forget troops. Nothing. Just don't stop Israel from winning the war, this war against the people who want Americans dead. What? I can't overstate the stupidity of what John Kerry is doing. It is not possible to overstate it. Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. CJ in Augusta, Georgia. Dennis Prager, thank you for calling.
Hi, Dennis. How are you doing?
Hi. How old are you?
I'm 12.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now, basically what you were saying, I completely agree with you 100%. The Obama administration has been completely passive when dealing with Israel. And the way that John Kerry is handling this situation is almost completely reminiscent to Neville Chamberlain. The Obama administration is going to have to take a bold approach, or we are going to be ridiculed on the world stage like we already are. And if we continue to aid Hamas by the Obama administration, inflicting control over government regulating, like the FAA, how they stopped all the flights to Israel, we are aiding them indirectly. And those people want to tear down the only democracy that we have in the Middle East, and the only country that represents the values that Americans cherish.
Are you? How do you know all that? Are you homeschooled?
No, I'm not. I'm public schooled.
Well, how do you know all this, and why are you so articulate? Were you reading it?
No, I've done a lot of research about it. I'm really interested in politics. I've done a lot of research about it, and it's just something that I like. It's just very interesting to me.
Well, I'm very proud of you.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Gives you some hope, doesn't it? Actually, I want you to know Triple G is weeping from the emotionality of the moment. That's really great. CJ, I'm serious. You do give us hope. We shall be back in a moment. You are listening to the Dennis Prager Show. We had a caller who had friends from Jordan who had a different take. And if you can get in, I don't know if you can, but if you can, I really did want to get your call. Hello, everybody. This is Dennis Prager. I've read to you the parallels between the peace lovers who enabled World War II to take place and the peace lovers today whom he thinks are also doing the same thing, like John Kerry, just shuttling back and forth to make peace when Israel is fighting the great enemy of our time, Islamic radicalism or radical Islam or Islamism. There is just so many things here. Let's go to Jay in Greenville, South Carolina. Hi, Jay. Dennis Prager.
Hey, Dennis. First time I've called. I disagree with your assessment that radical Islam is the greatest threat since Nazism. Nazism still exists under a new name. Radical global federalism is what I would call it.
Okay. Forgive me. I respect you tremendously, but let me just quickly say this, because I very rarely end calls early, but so forgive me, and I feel bad about it. I just don't want to. I don't want to go there because it's a totally separate discussion. However, there is truth to what you say. The movement toward universalizing everything and abolishing national identities and having the United Nations supplant the United States and other countries is a very real threat. However, right now, you, Jay, are in danger of being blown up, not by United Nations federalists, but by radical Islamists. So I don't believe it's the greatest threat right now. I think that radical Islam is the greatest threat. But you make a point that is worthy of consideration. Bassem in somewhere in Georgia. Hello, Bassem.
Yes.
Hi.
I'm actually just, I don't know, this is the first time I'm listening to your show, and you're just spilling the same rhetoric as the pro-Israelis and the media supporting the pro-Israelis. First of all, Hamas had killed 56 soldiers up to date. Israel killed 1,300 Palestinian civilians and injured almost 7,000, mostly children and women. And you're labeling Hamas as a terrorist organization. When you kill that many civilians, how do you justify that? You want to go by what Netanyahu is saying, how the Hamas is using civilians as human shields. How much longer are you going to go and go about saying all this?
How many Israelis, Bassem, how many Israelis would have died if Israel did not have the dome and the rockets could have fallen on Tel Aviv and Jerusalem? How many Israelis would have died?
Listen, if you want to discuss the rockets and the dome, why don't you discuss the occupation? Israel has...
Okay, sir, if you don't want to answer my question, then I will hang up on you. I will discuss anything you want, but
exactly.
you will discuss anything I want. How many Israelis would have died if Israel did not have the dome?
Okay, I'm going to go along with you, and say a lot of civilians may have died with the rockets.
All right, then you wouldn't have called and said only 53 Israelis died. Then you would have said thousands of Israelis have died and thousands of Palestinians have died.
So you justify the killing of Palestinian civilians right now?
I am justifying Israel's war. That is correct. I justify Israel's war just as I justified the war. Let me finish. I let you speak. Okay, sir, I'm going to put you on hold because there's no other way to talk to you. You're not being hung up on. You are on hold. I justify Israel's war on Hamas the same way I justify Britain's war on Nazi Germany. And many civilians, 10 times more civilians of Germans died than English civilians. Morality is not determined by numbers, but by good and evil. And you believe that Hamas is good. I believe it is evil, and I will let you respond as soon as we come back, but we have a hard break. So if you don't respond, it's because you hung up, not I. We shall return in a moment. You are listening to the Dennis Prager Show. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Dennis Prager here, and I have Bassem in Georgia on the line, and we have different views on what is happening in the Middle East. And let me just forgive me. Let me just recount that Bassem was saying that Israel has killed X number of civilians, and so many fewer Israelis have been killed. I countered by saying that doesn't tell me anything about the morality of the war, since 10 times as many German civilians were killed than British civilians, but it was a moral war to fight against Nazism, and I believe it's a moral war to fight against Hamas. You go now.
Okay, I'm not really discussing the war and what the impact of war. I need you to understand. You need to discuss the real issues and the root causes of why what's going on is what is going on. First of all, as far as Egypt government, the reason they are supporting Israel because the American government is providing them with $2 billion to be their puppet. The Saudi government, the Americans are the oil protector, and they are protecting the royal family. They're protecting their ruling chairs. So let's not let's misconceive and understand that the reasons behind why the Saudis and the Egyptians and the Jordanians governments are supporting Israel. The real issue is the occupation. When you come to me and you occupy my land, you steal my land, you demolish my house, you blockade me, you put me under siege for all the Palestinians, what do you expect them to do? Why don't you discuss this instead of discussing how Hamas is a terrorist organization and launching rockets on Israel? You are just saying the same exact thing as the Israelis are saying, trying to justify killing the children of Palestine.
Okay, all right. So I feel you've had your say. I will simply, I will ask you, do you, Bassem, believe that all of Palestine is occupied, or only the West Bank and Gaza?
Gaza and the West Bank.
Okay, so you acknowledge the right of a Jewish state of Israel to exist, but not occupy Gaza and the West Bank.
That's true.
Okay, so you will be happy to know that I don't want Israel to occupy the West Bank and Gaza either. Israel does not occupy Gaza. Israel left Gaza completely, and then everybody hoped, Israel naively, I naively hoped that Gaza would become a sort of Singapore in the Middle East. It spent all its money on building $1 billion worth of tunnels to send people to kill Israelis. They were not occupied. They were free. They got cement. They got the things that they needed. The West Bank is occupied because Yasser Arafat turned down an offer from Bill Clinton and Israel to have an independent Palestinian state in the year 2000. 97% of the West Bank would have been in Palestinian hands, and 3% of Israel would have been given over to make it 100%. There would be a 14-year-old Palestinian state today if it wasn't preoccupied with killing Israelis. The only reason for the occupation is that Israel has no choice, because there is if Israel were to leave, it would become a place to send rockets just as it is from
it's
Gaza.
Like you own the whole house and you just give me the bathroom. You expect me to accept this offer? What are you talking about?
What was the bathroom? 97% of the West Bank and all of Gaza.
97%?
Yes.
The Palestinian Authority recognized the right of Israel to exist. They laid down their weapons and they said, okay, now we want to negotiate. What have they gotten since 93, since the Oslo? They have got nothing. All they've got is the more Israelis building Jewish settlements on Palestinian land, confiscating more land, and killing Palestinians. And now you're talking about Hamas being a terrorist organization.
Do you not?
Hamas is the only freedom fighters for the Palestinian people. You have to understand that.
All right. Well, Nancy Pelosi agrees with you. You want to play Nancy Pelosi for me? Go ahead. Freedom fighters.
We try to have the two-state solution, that we have to support Abbas and his role as leader there. We have to support Iron Dome to protect the Israelis from the missiles. We have to support the Palestinians and what they need. And we have to confer with the Qataris, who have told me over and over again that Hamas is a humanitarian organization. Maybe they could use their influence
So you see, Bassem is not alone. Nancy Pelosi agrees with him. It's a humanitarian organization. Listen, thank you, sir. If you believe that they're fighting for freedom, then again, look, my motto, Bassem's first show of mine, Bassem has heard, apparently. My motto is I prefer clarity to agreement. I see Hamas as a despicable, Arab-hating, Muslim-hating terror organization that anyone who differs with is murdered, just as 20 Palestinians were murdered because they protested their war. And anyone who denies that they are using children and families as shields is lying to himself. And there's nothing I can do with people who lie to themselves. I can accuse people who know that they're telling a lie of lying, but if a person lies to himself, we live in alternate universes. Everyone who is fair-minded knows that that is exactly what Hamas is doing. In the history of the world, a free country and a non-free country at war, the free country is the one that wanted peace, and the non-free country is the one that wanted war. These are such elementary moral principles that it's actually sad to me to even have to articulate them. Overwhelmingly, Israelis want no war and just want Palestinians to have their own state and not want to kill Jews. Every terrorist, sent over to blow up Israelis has a shrine to his memory on the West Bank. Every. Schools named after them. Squares named after them. Hi, everybody. You're listening to the Dennis Prager Show. And I appreciate your being here. I'm just doing some research right here. And let me, so many calls here. Let's see. Mark in Texas believes that John Kerry is taking his position because he believes that he is protecting the U.S. government from Hamas. Abdul Abi in Columbus has not heard of any protest in Gaza. Just to do a quick Google. Hamas shot some 20 Palestinians on Monday night for protesting against Hamas for the massive destruction inflicted on their neighborhood in Shijaya by the Israel Defense Forces in the past weeks. This is from the Jerusalem Post. Now, if you say the Jerusalem Post makes up news, then okay, then it didn't happen. Free countries have a free press. They tend not to make up things in that regard. I think people understand that if you oppose Hamas in Gaza, you take your life into your hands. Is there any anti-Hamas literature that is allowed to be printed in Gaza? I don't know. Oops, sorry, folks, about that. I often hit the arm that holds this microphone. I need an armless microphone. I think I do. Or to be armless. That is a very, very valid point. That's true. Let's go to Michael in San Antonio. Michael, you have a little time. Not much. Go ahead.
Yes, sir, Dennis. I must respectfully disagree with you that that's about religion over there. And what I'm of the persuasion of, it's about money. When Hamas collects money for every pound of stuff that comes through the tunnels, resulting in 600 millionaires living in the Gaza area, in the Palestinian area, and I can guarantee you that none of the millionaires' homes are bombed or shelled whatsoever.
So wait, I don't understand. So Israel is collaborating with the Gaza millionaires?
Well, what I'm trying to tell you is that how do the millionaires keep making money from the tunnels?
Well,
they have Israel closed down the border, so all the stuff's got to come through the tunnels, and they got to pay tribute, and the stuff's higher priced. Okay,
all right. Look, it's a colorful world out there, folks. It is about religion. It is. That's why the Sunni ISIS is beheading all of these Shiites. Maybe Americans and others like to think things are all about money, but radical Islamists know it's about religion. I'm Dennis Prager. Hello, my friends. You're listening to the Dennis Prager Show. By way of introduction of my guest, there are quite a number of articles that have been published in the last few days and indeed the last couple of weeks. There's a piece in the Wall Street Journal, "The Ugly Tide Washing Across Europe the Gaza generation. This is by the leading French philosopher. In Europe, they take their philosophers very seriously. I don't think the average American can name one American philosopher, which I don't think is a tragedy as it happens, but that's a separate issue. The Gaza generation, as he calls it, seems worried about Arab deaths only when Jews are involved. It's an article in the Wall Street Journal. And there are a whole host of pieces in the American media about the nature of the demonstrations against Israel. Powerful one in Investors Business Daily today. Anti-Semitism on the rise in the United States as well as Europe. Thousands of angry Muslims, I'm reading, most of them Mideast immigrants, have taken to the streets to shout anti-Jewish epithets. Paris, Brussels, no, it's happening in U.S. cities, and it appears to be spreading at an alarming rate. That's all related, though not the direct subject, but very, very related to the subject of a very important book by a guy I know many years and I admire tremendously for his insights and his research and his writing. It's Joshua Murchavik, and he has written here. Josh is a fellow at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. I didn't know that, Josh. When did you join Johns Hopkins?
Well, about 6 years ago, Dennis. Before that, I was at American Enterprise Institute.
Yeah, that's what I recalled. Yes. Well, very nice. The book answers a question that, if you think about, has to intrigue any of you interested in what's happening in the world, which is the vast majority of you, or you wouldn't be listening to the show. How did Israel go from beloved in the West to hated in not all the West, but in much of the West? And the book is titled, a good title, Making David into Goliath, How the World Turned Against Israel. It's published by Encounter, one of the great publishing houses, and it is up at my website. And I think it tells you it probably tells you more about the West and what's happened, especially what has happened to the great venerated term liberal, than it does even about Israel. So welcome to the show, Josh. Good to have you on.
Oh, thank you, Dennis. I'm very glad to be on, and thanks for all your kind words in the intro.
Yeah, you deserve them. As you know, we know each other very many years.
Long time.
Yes, indeed. And we never see each other, but we're aware of each other's work. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's so true. I'm going to be in Los Angeles in 2 weeks. Maybe I'll get to see you.
Well, if I'm here, I would love that. Absolutely. It's a big if in my case, so we have to work that out. Good. I'm glad you told me. We will try to do that. Making David into Goliath, How the World Turned Against. Why don't you tell, in a nutshell, tell my listeners just how pro-Israel the West was at one time?
Well, if you take the early decades of Israel's existence, in the 1950s, the book Exodus was published. It was a novel by a Jewish author, but beautifully telling and romanticizing the story of the birth of Israel. Exodus was the best-selling novel since Gone with the Wind. And then, of course, it became a major motion picture. And then it was translated into scores of languages. It became a bestseller all around the world. Then, if you come forward about 10 years after the publication of Exodus, you had the Six-Day War in 1967. Public opinion polls showed that Americans, by a very lopsided majority, supported Israel rather than the Arabs. But public opinion polls in Europe showed that Israel was supported by even more lopsided margins than in the U.S. So, there were big demonstrations in London and Paris. There were big display ads in the newspapers signed by the most luminous Parisian intellectual figures like Jean-Paul Sartre or Pablo Picasso, what have you. So it was sort of overwhelming support for Israel, and B, very heavily coming from the intellectual left.
You know, I got to tell you a story that so corroborates this about Europe. At a little after the 6-Day War, I was in college and I was studying in England, and I went to Germany at least once a month, probably twice a month, because I had a girlfriend there. And I just took a boat over from Harwich to Bremerhaven, then a train over to Kiel. Anyway, I was always into photography, and the greatest camera in the world at the time, or at least 35 millimeter, was a Leica. Leicas were made in Germany, and I had no money to buy a Leica. I couldn't afford it, but that was my dream. I went to a camera store in Hamburg, and the guy spoke English, and I told him I was. He said, "Well, why are you so dying to get a Leica here?" And I said, "Well, it's the greatest camera, and I'm about to visit Israel." He goes, "Oh, really? Are you a Jew?" "Yeah." "You going to Israel?" I said, "Yeah." And he gave me a Leica for the cheapest that I think he could possibly sell it without losing money. And so I just want, that's what I remember. I remember what you're saying, in other words.
And then it starting in the 70s, and then just picking up momentum, swinging the other way. And it's swung so far that, of course, as you know today, Israel is really the number one pariah of the so-called international community. And in my thinking and knowledge, Dennis, you can tell me if you can come up with an exception, I cannot think of any country in history that, if it did not have a revolution that completely changed the nature of the country or the regime, that underwent such a total reversal in the way the rest of the world viewed it and treated it.
I can't think of any, not even the United States, which right after World War II was revered in Europe, and then gradually not. But it's not the same thing. So, what's your thesis? What happened in the 70s?
I think that there were two different. If I may, I try not to be too long-winded here, but I hit on the idea of writing this book when I read the story of Aftonbladet. I'm sure you remember that, Dennis, and it was a Swedish daily newspaper, the biggest circulation daily newspaper in Sweden, ran with the story in 2009 that Israelis were now slaughtering random Palestinians to harvest their body organs for sale. And it turned out, of course, the story was a complete fabrication, not even by some Palestinians. It was a complete fabrication by the author of this Swedish correspondent. But when I read that, and read that the leading Swedish daily published it, and then the Swedish government, when it was criticized from Israel, defended it and said, well, this is press freedom, I thought to myself, what on earth is going on here? I understand some people disagree with Israel, even disagree sharply, don't like the settlements, what have you, but to have an image where you could simply believe and run and put into print a story that Israelis are doing something like that is just so off the charts. I wanted to try to understand it. And when I then turned to researching this, it struck me that there were two kinds of factors at play. On the one hand, material pressures that were brought to bear, and on the other hand, a big intellectual transformation that was not just about the Middle East, but that had a dramatic consequence in terms of how people viewed the Middle East. The material pressures...
All right, tell us in a moment. Tell us in a moment, Joshua Murchavik. I want you to have the time to say it without a commercial break. The book is really about, it's almost a diary of the Western conscience in the last generation. That's how important the subject is. Making David into Goliath, How the World Turned Against Israel. It is up at DennisPrager.com. We shall return and take your calls as well. 1-8-PRAGER-776. Hello, my friends. Dennis Prager here with Joshua Murchavik of the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. He's written hundreds of articles, many books. He's an intellectually rigorous thinker. Making David into Goliath is his book, How the World Turned Against Israel. The timing, unfortunately, turns out to be perfect for the publication of the book. And whatever your politics, you have to admit it's worthy of exploring. How did that happen? I remember again. I was very young, and I remember seeing Life magazine, Israel's Bar Mitzvah. I mean, it was the cover of Life, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, it was just the celebration of Israel and America and in the West generally. And then, so I'm asking you, Josh Murchavik, what happened in the 70s? And you say that there were two changes, one material and what was the other?
The other was a broad intellectual change in the main ideas of leftism.
All right, so let's start with the material.
So, well, first there was terrorism, lots of it on European soil, and it just scared the pants off the Europeans, and their response to it was appeasement. Eventually, a study was done by the Israeli Foreign Ministry which showed that of 204 individuals who had been captured and held in custody in the act of a hijacking or some other terrorist attack, 201 had been promptly released because the Europeans were afraid to hold them. So they really were frightened, and so were, by the way, the moderate Arabs. Arafat's deputy, Abu Iyad, even boasts in his memoirs, you can see it there, that they created, quote, a climate of terror, close quote, his words, to force the moderate Arabs to fall into line behind the claim that the PLO was the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. So terrorism really worked for the Palestinian radicals. And then on top of that came the oil embargo, which also just really brought Europe and Japan to their knees. And Secretary Kissinger tried to rally the West to resist and to come up with countermeasures, and he, in his memoirs, wrote about his frustration that they were absolutely terrified and would not consider anything he proposed. And, of course, there's the sheer weight of numbers, Dennis. For every Jew in the world, there are 100 Muslims. There's one Israel. There are 22 member states of the Arab League. There are 57 member states of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And they, among them, wield a great deal of economic and diplomatic weight. People who don't have courage are afraid to go against them in the diplomatic arena. And they've taken over the UN, and they've used the UN as a battering ram against Israel. So those things together are what I call the material pressures that were exercised.
That's terrific. That is really terrific. I need to realize how effective the embargo at 73, the terror of the 70s, and the sheer overwhelming weight of Arab and Muslim societies, countries, etc. are. We forget that, and so you need courage. So America, in the scorecard, was everybody affected except America?
Yes, pretty much so. You know, in other countries, it kind of cycles in and out. For example, right now there's a magnificent government in Canada, which is even more strongly supportive of Israel in the current tense moments than the U.S. government. But that hasn't always been true in Canada. It sort of depends on which government's in power there. I think the only one that's been consistently had the courage to resist this pressure has been the United States.
Okay, so that, of course, the Canadian example brings us to number two, the transformation of the left.
And the transformation of the left is really big, and bear in mind that it is the left, but the left is immensely influential in the world of letters, in the world of journalism, and it sets the intellectual tone, especially outside the United States, but even to a great extent in the United States on our universities and elsewhere. And here I think there was a bigger transformation that took place that was not specific to the Middle East, but had enormous consequences for the Middle East. And that is, leftism for about a century revolved around a central paradigm. And you'll remember, Dennis, when you and I first met, I was a totally involved young socialist.
Yes.
Yipsel. I ate and breathed this, so I knew it well.
Yipsel, folks, is Young People's Socialist League. They were democratic socialists and strongly anti-communist.
We were. I'm still proud of that. I'm no longer a socialist by a long margin, but I'm still proud of that. But all different varieties of leftism revolved around one central, really exciting idea, and that was class struggle, the poor against the rich, the workers against the capitalists. And this was seen not just as a matter of fairness. This was seen as some kind of redemptive passion play, a moral drama that when the poor and the workers rose up for fair treatment or whatever, they would change society so everything would be better and happier and fairer. I think that after about a century, or in the latter part of the 20th century, that paradigm, if I can use that awful jargon from academia, that paradigm kind of lost its pizzazz, and it kind of was pushed aside by a new paradigm of redemptive struggle that grew out of the anti-colonial movements of Asia and Africa and was kind of overlaid coincidentally by the great civil rights struggle in the United States, and that was ethnic and national struggle that came to be called the Rest against the West, or the people of color against the white man. And once again, it wasn't just seen in narrow terms, it was seen as the overwhelming moral drama of our era. And if you look at the world through that lens, well, and then you focus on the Middle East, well, Israel are the Western white guys, the Arabs and Palestinians are the anti-colonial people of color, and the white guys are always wrong.
Wow. Yep. Instead of good and evil, I've said this for years, the left has substituted rich and poor, white and non-white, Western and non-Western, and strong and weak. We should think of good and evil. The book, Making David into Goliath, How the World Turned Against Israel, with Joshua Murchavik. The book is up at my website. Hello, everybody. Dennis Prager here. The book that I am discussing is so interesting. You turn to any page and you get riveted. Making David into Goliath is the title. It's exactly what the book is about. And the subtitle makes that clear, how the world turned against Israel. The world was so, at least the Western world, was so supportive of Israel. And then in the 70s, it all turned around. Let me ask you, this is totally hypothetical. I'm speaking to Joshua Murchavik of Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Now, if there had not been a Six-Day War, or even better, if Israel had never captured the West Bank of the Jordan, King Hussein did not go to war with Israel, and it were just as it was prior to 67, except for the Sinai and the Golan Heights, would that have affected world opinion, or at least the world's left?
I don't think that the question of the specific territory was at issue. If there had been no ongoing Palestinian struggle, or not ongoing, but really starting back then, if there had been no struggle of the Arabs against Israel, then I don't think that the world would have turned in the sense we're seeing a huge flare-up of anti-Semitism right now, but I don't know that there would have been that just from the natural cycles of...
All right, so let's put it this way. There's, in effect, with all of your study of this, is there anything Israel could have done other than commit suicide that would have rendered it different in the eyes of those who hate it now? I mean, in the West.
No, I don't think so, Dennis. Unless, there are people who believe that if only Israel would be more forthcoming, more dovish, more conciliatory, the Arabs are just waiting to make peace with Israel, and would have done so, or would do so now, or what have you. And if you believe that, then sure, if there was peace between Israel and the Arabs, then the rest of the world would probably busy itself hating someone else. But in my view, there's nothing that Israel could have done except disappear that would have ended the conflict with the Arabs. The core of this conflict is the existence of Israel. It's not anything Israel has done. It's the sense that it's a tremendous, unbearable affront to Arab pride and dignity to have a Jewish sovereignty in the midst of the Arab lands. And it doesn't really matter what the size of that sovereignty is.
Yeah, well, I'm in complete agreement. That's why I did my video for what I've created as Prager University, saying exactly that.
One of the things that I actually learned, I didn't know it, or if I had ever known it, I'd forgotten it, but I learned more about in writing this book that I brought out, is that there was no Palestinianism.
That's right.
That when the PLO was formed in 1964, it was created by Nasser, the president of Egypt, and the Palestinian National Covenant, that was the foundational document of the PLO, did not mention a Palestinian state or a sovereign Palestinian people. What was to be the point of the liberation was not to liberate a nation, it was to liberate that territory from the Jews, so that Palestine could be part of the larger Arab nation that was...
Well, let me tell everybody the book, because I got to say thank you. Making David into Goliath, How the World Turned Against Israel, Joshua Murchavik. This is a truly significant book. I don't say that often. Thank you, Joshua Murchavik, and hope to see you in L.A.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Great being on.
Hi, everybody. Dennis Prager here. The author I just had on, Joshua Murchavik, he's so humble that he didn't mention that for those of you in the Southern California area, he will be speaking for the Horowitz Freedom Center on August 13th, and information is available through the Horowitz Freedom Center. And I'm happy to announce that and let people know what, because he's so thoughtful, and that's why this stuff is so important. Welcome back, Dennis Prager here. Chuck in Woodland Thrills, California. Hi, Chuck.
Dennis, that was an excellent guest. And Dennis, you're one of the few people that can look past all this stuff that's been so embedded about colonialism and just say, let's look at good and evil and forget about the color of people's skin around the world. It's amazing that that's so complicated, because, as you say, if you just look at good and evil and the values of the two sides, it's so obvious that moral equivalency doesn't apply in this Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
You know what? You get it. You get it. That's exactly right. Let me say a word about that. I'm very happy I took your call. See, I can't be a leftist because I can't undo my belief that the only division that matters is decent and indecent, good and bad, right and wrong. Not rich and poor, not white and non-white, not strong and weak, but right and wrong, and especially when there's good and evil. What else matters? Why does anything else come close to mattering? Can the poorer one not be evil? Can the weaker one not be evil? Do we not want the good to be strong? Isn't there something sick in the anti-Israel tsunami? It's too strong. So if it were weaker and more Israelis died, then we would have a different moral universe. Understand how just sick that is? I am, as many of you know, I'm guided by the Bible as much as I can be. It is truly, to some of you, it's contemptible. To some of you, it's admirable. And to others of you, it's just interesting that I am, but I am. God says, oh man, have I not told you all I demand from you? And that is to pursue justice, act mercifully, and walk humbly with your God. It's pretty easy to understand. This is what God wants. He wants us to be just. Justice includes, do not favor the poor in judgment. It's another biblical law. You can't. If a billionaire and a homeless person are in court, you judge according to what occurred and according to justice, not according to fairness. Fairness is a left-wing word. That is when the government tries to institute it. I am all for fairness in the rest of life, and life isn't fair, and it bothers me tremendously, and always did. The amount of unfairness in life is overwhelming, obviously. Let's go to Hudson Oak, Texas, and Mike. Hello, Mike. Dennis Prager.
Hi, Dennis. I'm a baby boomer, and I was raised in the Christian church up until the present, and I had noticed a change in the Christian perspective from my viewpoint that anti-Semitism, actually was fairly strong in the Christian church starting in the 3rd century or so. And but there was sort of a change in the late 60s and early 70s where a lot of the Christian church started to support Israel. I saw the book, The Late Great Planet Earth, which was a bestseller, seemed to have a large influence in the Christian church, on the Christian church's view of Israel. And, and as you kind of proposed, that the Christian church is really one of the stronger proponents for Israel today.
Well said. Yeah, it's the strongest, actually. I just spoke last week in Washington, D.C. at the Christians United for Israel National Convention at the Washington Convention Center, 5,000 people, overwhelmingly Christians. But I think it's important that Mike, and that Jews and Christians and others know of the history of Christian Zionism. It's in the sense of this overwhelming support among the more traditional Christians for Israel and the Jewish people. That's true. That's a recent development, but not support for the Jews having their return to their country. Christian Zionism goes back quite a number of centuries. And then, of course, there is the issue of American Christianity, which was very different from European Christianity, and which always had within it a deeply philo-Semitic, that is pro-Jewish, core. Now, there was anti-Semitism. There was popular anti-Semitism in the United States. There were quotas on Jews, but these were not instituted in the name of Christianity. It's actually instituted in the name by progressive college presidents, where they had quotas against Jews at Harvard and so on. My father was a religious Jew in the U.S. Navy, 3 years on ship in fighting in the Pacific, and got nothing but respect from the 99% of his fellow Navymen who supported him in every way. The captain announced the first day if he sees any anti-Semitism on that ship, he will deal with it with utter severity. It's America's been different. Will it remain different? That's the big question. I'm Dennis Prager. We continue. Hi, everybody. You're listening to the Dennis Prager Show. Final segment, believe it or not. Got a lot of good calls, but got a lot of little time. Got a lot of little time. That is whoa bad. That was bad. I don't want to hear that on Friday in the montage, all right? Because you're going to make me self-conscious, and then the show is over. I have to be allowed my mistakes. He's jotting it down. You know that? I want you to know, folks, that Triple G is somewhat of a bully. He is. We bring that up constantly to human resources here, and they do nothing. They just do nothing. They smile. What can I say? Lila in L.A. makes the point that after the Holocaust, people rallied with the Jews, but the real anti-Semitism never left. Very good point, especially in Europe. I think there is an element as well in Europe that is relieved. You see, well, when we had power, we mass murdered Jews, and now the Jews have power, they're mass murdering Palestinians. I think there is that thinking that there is a sort of relief of the conscience. See, we're all bad. It's very tempting to believe that. I think that's in addition to the historic anti-Semitism that exists there. And if you don't think anti-Semitism is related to hatred of Israel, you have to explain why, of all the countries in the world, it's the only one whose annihilation is the desired end of dozens of countries. Hundreds of millions of people would like only one country on earth annihilated, exterminated. It's also the only Jewish country on earth. Do you think that that's a coincidence? I'm serious. Do you think that that's a coincidence? And I have never been one to find anti-Semitism under every rock. In fact, I never even talk about it. Almost never. But this is pretty clear. So I'll end the way I began, that my anger at Penelope Cruz and Javier Bardem and these others who accuse Israel in a public letter of genocide. Read my column this week. The genocide libel. I can't overstate my contempt for these people and their how broken and disastrous and stupid their moral conscience is. Genocide. You know what else it does? It cheapens the real genocides that really did take place. I'll see you tomorrow. I'm Dennis Prager.